I knew Christmas was going to be uncomfortable before I even got my coat off. Leah's brother looked at my boots first, then at the old canvas jacket I wore over my hoodie, and he gave this little laugh like he had been waiting years to use it. He said, "Well, look at that. Leah finally brought the charity husband home." Everybody heard it. Leah's mother froze with a tray of cookies in her hands. Her father glanced at me, then looked down like the kitchen tile had suddenly become interesting. Leah squeezed our daughter against her hip and whispered, "Don't start, Mason." But Mason had already started, and the worst part was that nobody stopped him. I stood there in the doorway of that two-story house in Millfield, Ohio, with snow packed against the porch steps and Christmas lights blinking around the windows, holding a diaper bag in one hand and a wrapped gift in the other, feeling like I had walked into a room where a joke about me had been going on for years. I should have turned around right then. Instead, I smiled like I had not heard him clearly. I said, "Merry Christmas to you too," and stepped inside because Ava was sleepy, Leah was tense, and I had promised her I would not make this trip hard. That promise started costing me before dinner. Leah and I had been together 5 years. We had met in Columbus after she moved in with her aunt for work and rented the downstairs unit in the same duplex where I was living at the time. Back then I was still driving a dented Tacoma, still doing repair jobs with drywall dust on my jeans, still the kind of man people looked at and assumed they understood in 3 seconds. Leah never treated me that way in the beginning. She would sit on the back steps with me after my late shifts, eating takeout from a foam container while I told her about broken furnaces and busted locks and the strange things people left behind in rentals. She laughed at my stories, and when my mother got sick that spring, Leah was the one who sat beside me in the hospital parking lot at midnight and held my hand until I stopped shaking. That was the Leah I married. That was the Leah I remembered on the drive to Millfield when Ava fell asleep in the back seat with a stuffed rabbit under her chin and Leah leaned her head against my shoulder at a gas station while I filled the tank. She had been quiet the whole trip, but when I asked if she was nervous, she said, "I just want them to see what I have now." I thought she meant me and Ava. By the time we got to her parents' house, I was not sure anymore. Her family acted happy in that loud holiday way, with too many hugs, too much food, and too many people pretending old tension was not standing in the middle of the room. Leah's mother, Debbie, cried when she saw Ava. Her father, Ron, clapped me on the shoulder and said it had been too long, even though he had never once driven the 3 hours to visit us. Mason kept watching me like I was a bad purchase. Leah refused to return. At dinner, he asked what I was doing now. I told him I still handled property maintenance and project work. That was true enough for the version of me I let most people see. He stabbed a piece of ham with his fork and said, "So basically you fix rich people's toilets." Leah said his name again, sharper this time, but her cousin laughed into her wine glass, and that was all Mason needed. He said, "I'm just saying, Blake owns 3 lots downtown now, and Ethan still shows up looking like he borrowed his jacket from a bus station lost and found." There it was. Blake. The name landed too smoothly for a stranger. I looked at Leah, but she was cutting Ava's food into tiny squares, pretending she did not feel my eyes on her. Ron took a long drink from his beer. Debbie started talking quickly about church, cookies, anything else. I knew then that Blake was not just some local success story. I just did not know how much of my marriage he had already touched. The next afternoon, Ron invited me to ride with him to a bar near the grain elevator. He called it a quick drink with old friends, and because I wanted to keep peace, I went. The place smelled like fried onions, wet coats, and beer soaked into wood from 20 Christmases before. Ron introduced me around as Leah's husband, but not with pride. More like he was explaining a stain on the carpet. One of his friends asked if I was the guy from Columbus. Another asked if I still rented. Ron laughed and said, "Ethan works hard. He's not fancy, but he works hard." Not fancy. That was the polite version of what they meant. I could have told them I had sold my first 12-unit building for $940,000 the year before. I could have told them the company I helped build had closed $3.8 million in property acquisitions in 18 months. I could have told them I had a 41% stake in a storage development outside Columbus that was projected to clear $312,000 a year after debt service. I did not. I had learned young that money changes the way people smile at you, and I hated that almost more than being underestimated. So I let them see the boots. When Ron drove me back near sunset, I was almost calm. Then we turned into the driveway, and I saw Leah standing by the front gate with a man in a camel coat and polished brown shoes, both of them leaning close like the cold had given them an excuse. He touched her arm when he laughed. Leah did not move away fast enough. I got out before Ron even parked. Ava was inside with Debbie, so there was no reason for Leah to be out there with a man I had never met. The guy looked at me as I approached, and his smile did not fade. It sharpened. Leah said, "Ethan, this is Blake. We went to school together." I waited for the rest. Blake extended his hand with that soft, lazy grip some men use when they want you to feel dismissed without making a scene. He said, "Good to finally meet you." Finally. That one word told me he had heard my name before. I asked, "You too close?" Leah's face tightened. Blake answered before she could. He said, "Small town. Everybody knows everybody." Then he looked past me at Ron, like I had already taken too much time, and added, "I was just wishing her a Merry Christmas." He turned back to Leah and said, "It was really good seeing you, Princess." Princess. I felt that word hit the side of my head, like a thrown glass. Leah's eyes jumped to mine. Blake saw it, smiled to himself, and walked away toward a black truck parked across the street. I did not say anything until we were inside. I waited because Debbie had Ava in the living room, because Mason was on the couch, because Christmas music was playing, and everybody was pretending the front gate had not just turned into a crime scene in my chest. Then, Ron made it worse. While Leah went upstairs to change Ava, he stood beside me near the kitchen island and said, without looking directly at me, "You know Blake and Leah dated, right?" I turned my head slowly. He shrugged. "Long time ago. High school. A little after that too, before she moved to Columbus." The room got very quiet in a way only I seemed to notice. Leah had never told me Blake was her ex. Not once. Not during 5 years together. Not during late-night talks. Not during pregnancy scares. Not after our courthouse wedding. Not when she asked me to spend Christmas in the town, where he apparently still walked around calling her princess. I found her in the upstairs hallway outside the guest room. I asked, "Why didn't you tell me Blake was your ex?" She looked past me toward the stairs. "Because it was years ago, Ethan." "That wasn't my question." She lowered her voice. "I knew you would react exactly like this." That answer did something ugly to me because it sounded prepared. Not guilty, prepared. I said, "He called you princess right in front of me." She rolled her eyes, but her hands were shaking as she folded Ava's sweater. "It's just a stupid old nickname." "Old for who?" She snapped the sweater into the suitcase harder than she needed to. "I'm not doing this at my parents' house." And just like that, the conversation was over, because she decided it was over. For the next 2 days, I tried to swallow it. I really did. I played with Ava in the snow. I helped Ron carry boxes from the garage. I sat through Mason's little comments about my truck, my job, my quietness, my blue-collar pride, as if working with your hands made you defective. Blake kept appearing in conversation like a leak nobody wanted to repair. Blake had bought land. Blake knew the mayor. Blake had helped with the school fundraiser. Blake was doing so well. Blake looked good. Blake had always been ambitious. Every mention came with a quick glance at me. The cruelest one came on Christmas night, after Ava fell asleep on the couch and the adults sat around the dining table with coffee. Mason was talking about money, the way people do when they do not have enough, but want you to think they do. He said Blake had a $420,000 development deal pending near the old feed mill. Then he looked at me and said, "No offense, Ethan, but Leah always had expensive taste. I never understood how she adjusted." Debbie said, "Mason." He raised both hands. "What?" "I'm complimenting her. She chose love over lifestyle." The table went silent. Then Blake's name came out of Leah's phone. Not literally. The screen lit up beside her coffee cup, and I saw the notification before she turned it over. One word was enough. Blake. Leah grabbed the phone so fast her chair scraped the floor. I stared at her hand. "Why is he texting you?" Her face changed. Not into anger first, into fear. That was what scared me. Mason leaned back with a grin like he had just found the best show in town. Ron looked at his plate. Debbie reached for Ava, even though Ava was asleep 6 feet away. Leah said, "It's probably just a Christmas message." "Then show me." "No." One syllable. Flat. Final. I said, "Your ex calls you princess at the gate. Your family talks about it for 2 days. And now he's texting you at Christmas dinner. Show me the message." She stood. I said no. Mason laughed under his breath and said, "Man, this is exactly why she didn't bring you around." I looked at him. "Stay out of my marriage." He leaned forward. "Maybe stop acting like you own her." That was attack number 2, and this time it had an audience. Leah walked toward the hallway with her phone clutched in her fist. I followed her, not yelling yet, just trying to keep my voice low enough that Ava would not wake up. I said, "Leah, if there's nothing wrong, why are you hiding it?" She turned near the staircase. "Because you get like this." "Like what?" "Possessive, suspicious, small." Small. That word landed harder than charity husband. Maybe because Mason was cruel and I expected nothing better from him. Leah was my wife. She knew where to cut. I said, "You're making me feel crazy for reacting to something any husband would question." She looked toward the dining room, making sure they could hear enough, then said, "You're embarrassing me." I almost laughed because I was the one being measured, mocked, and compared to her ex in a house where nobody had ever asked what kind of man I really was. But she had turned the whole thing around with one sentence. Now, I was the problem. That night, she slept facing the wall in the guest room while Ava slept between us. I stared at the ceiling and listened to Leah's breathing, wondering how many messages she had hidden before that one. At 2:17 in the morning, her phone buzzed again on the nightstand. She woke up before I moved. That was when I stopped believing this was innocent. We drove home the next day through gray slush and low clouds. Leah barely spoke. Ava sang pieces of Christmas songs in the back seat, too young to understand that the front seat had turned into a courtroom with no judge. Halfway to Columbus, Leah said, "You ruined that trip." I kept my eyes on the road. "Blake ruined that trip." "No, your insecurity did." I laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "So he can call you princess, text you at dinner, and hide in your phone. But my problem is noticing." She crossed her arms. "You don't trust me. You gave me a reason not to." After that, silence came down like a wall. For a few days, we performed normal life badly. I went to work. She went to the medical billing office where she handled insurance claims. Ava stayed with our neighbor, Grace, who babysat during the day. We ate dinner in the same kitchen and spoke only about milk, laundry, daycare, gas, and whether Ava needed cough syrup. But the house itself felt like it was listening. On January 6th, a Tuesday, everything broke open. We had just finished dinner. Ava was on the living room rug building a tower from plastic blocks. Leah was beside me on the couch, not touching me, scrolling through her phone with the screen angled slightly away. Then it buzzed. I looked down because it was inches from my hand. "Blake, are you alone yet?" That was all I saw before Leah snatched it. My body went cold first, then hot so fast I thought I might be sick. I said, "Show me the rest." She stood immediately. "No." I stood too. "Show me the message, Leah." Ava stopped stacking blocks. Leah looked at our daughter, then back at me, and somehow used that tiny pause as a weapon. "You're scaring her." I stepped back, palms open. "I'm asking you to show me a message from your ex asking if you're alone." She said, "He needed to talk." "About what?" "Not everything is your business." There are sentences that do not end a conversation. They end an era. I reached for the phone. I am not proud of that. I was angry, humiliated, and tired of being told that seeing what was in front of me made me unstable. Leah jerked her arm away and backed toward the hallway. Ava started crying. That sound cut through me. I stopped. Leah did not. She kept saying, "See? See what you're doing?" Louder and louder, until our neighbor probably heard through the wall. I picked Ava up and tried to calm her while Leah disappeared into the bedroom with the phone. When she came out 20 minutes later, the screen was dark, her face was dry, and her voice was controlled. Too controlled. She said, "I'm going to bed." I said, "Not until we talk." She looked at Ava asleep against my shoulder and said, "There is nothing to talk about with a man who acts like this." That was attack number 3, and this one did not come from Mason or Blake. It came from the woman who knew exactly how much I had tried not to become the jealous villain she could point to. The next evening, she threw her unlocked phone onto the bed. I had just come upstairs after putting Ava's pajamas in the dryer. Leah stood in the doorway with her arms folded and said, "Go ahead, look, since this is what you want so badly." The gesture was so theatrical that I knew before I touched the phone. I said, "You waited 24 hours. She blinked. "Excuse me? If there was nothing there, you would have shown me last night." She gave a bitter little smile. "You're impossible." I picked up the phone anyway because some foolish part of me still wanted to be wrong. I opened her messages. Blake was gone. I searched his name. Nothing. I checked recent calls, nothing. WhatsApp, nothing. Instagram, nothing. Clean. Too clean. Leah watched me like she expected an apology. Then I opened her contacts and found his number saved under B. She moved fast, but I moved first. I tapped call and put it on speaker. Leah's face drained. "Ethan, don't." That was all the confirmation I needed. The phone rang twice. Then Blake answered with a sleepy, smiling voice that made my skin crawl. "Hey, princess, is he still watching you?" For 1 second, nobody breathed. Then Leah lunged for the phone. I stepped back and said, "Blake, this is Ethan." Silence. I heard movement on his end, a rustle, maybe a door closing. Then he said, "You need to calm down." I laughed because men like Blake always say calm down after lighting the match. "You texted my wife asking if she was alone." He said, "Maybe ask yourself why she didn't feel safe telling you the truth." Leah whispered, "Hang up." I said, "What truth?" Blake did not answer right away. When he did, his voice was lower. "The truth that you were never enough for her." Leah slapped the phone out of my hand. It hit the dresser, bounced, and landed face down on the rug. Ava started crying from the hallway. I'd not even heard her door open. Everything after that happened too fast and too loudly. Leah grabbed Ava. I told her not to leave with our daughter while we were in the middle of this. She screamed that I was blocking her. I stepped away from the door immediately, but she was already shouting loud enough for the neighbor to hear, "Stop touching me," even though my hands were nowhere near her. That lie changed the temperature of the room. Grace knocked on the front door 3 minutes later. Leah was crying by then. Real tears or useful ones, I could not tell. She said she was taking Ava to her Aunt Claire's apartment for the night. I said we needed to talk like adults. Grace looked at me like she was seeing the version Leah had just described. Leah walked out with our daughter in her arms. Ava reached for me over her shoulder. That image still lives in my chest like a nail. I did not sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with Leah's broken silence around me. The Christmas card still taped to the fridge, Ava's cup beside the sink, and the phone call replaying in my head until every word had teeth. "Is he still watching you? You were never enough for her." By morning, the story had already moved without me. Mason texted me at 7:42 a.m. He said, "Stay away from my sister until you get help." Debbie called and cried into my voicemail about how fear was not love. Ron sent one message that said he hoped I would be reasonable about custody. Custody. That word had not existed in my home 24 hours earlier. At 10:15, Leah texted me from Claire's phone because she claimed she needed space and had blocked me for her own safety. She wrote, "Get used to being alone in that house. I'm not coming back." Then came the line that made me sit completely still. "And don't think your little repair job gives you any power over me." I read it twice, then a third time. For 5 years, I had let Leah's family believe I was just the man who fixed things. I let them think the truck, the boots, the quietness, and the plain shirts were the whole story. I let Blake look at me like a man with no leverage because sometimes silence is the safest place to keep power. But Leah had forgotten one thing. The house she told me to get used to being alone in was not a rental. It was paid for through an LLC I controlled, appraised at $684,000 the previous spring. The duplex where we met, the one her aunt still rented for $1,850 a month, belonged to the same portfolio. And the old feed mill Blake kept bragging about, the $420,000 development deal Mason had thrown in my face at Christmas, had crossed my desk 3 weeks earlier because Blake needed financing he could not get from a bank. I had not touched that file because I did not know it was personal. Now, it was personal. At noon, my accountant, Victor, called while I was sitting in my truck outside Ava's daycare, staring at the entrance because Leah had changed the pickup list without telling me. Victor said, "You need to check the Millfield file." I closed my eyes. Which one? The feed mill deal. The applicant added a guarantor last night. I opened my laptop with my hands colder than the January air. The file loaded slowly. Blake's name sat at the top, exactly where I expected it. Then I saw the second name, Leah, and under the attached documents was a scanned statement from an account I had never seen before, showing a balance of $118,734. My wife had not just been texting her ex, she had been signing herself into his future. I wanted to call her, read the account balance out loud, ask why my wife's name was sitting beside Blake's on a financing file, like she had been planning a second life while I was still paying for the first one. I wanted to ask her why she had let her family talk about me like I was a broke man eating at their table, when she knew I had carried us through every hard month without once throwing money in her face. But I did not call. That was the first smart thing I had done in days. I called Victor back and asked him to send everything to my attorney, Karen Fields. Then I told him to freeze any internal review on Blake's application and keep the file exactly as it was. No calls to Blake. No warning. No friendly clarification. If there was fraud in that folder, I wanted it preserved before anybody had time to clean it. Victor got quiet. Then he said, "Ethan, there's more." My stomach tightened. He told me the application included a spousal acknowledgement form with my typed name on it. Not my signature, not exactly, but a digital mark attached to an email address I had not used in years. It stated that I knew Leah was guaranteeing part of Blake's $420,000 bridge loan, and that I had no objection to marital funds being used as reserve proof. I sat in my truck outside Ava's daycare, while the truth got uglier by the second. Someone had put my name on a financial document. Not a text, not a rumor, not a flirtation. A document. I asked Victor, how much was she pledging? He said, "The reserve account shows $118,734, and the proposal says she would contribute $75,000 at closing for a 15% silent interest." Silent interest. That phrase almost made me laugh because everything about Leah had become silent. Silent phone, silent messages, silent account, silent partnership with the man who had stood at her parents' gate and called her princess in front of me. Then Victor said the part that changed my anger into something colder. "Blake listed you as a property maintenance contractor on the project budget." I stared through the windshield. "What?" "He put you down for post-closing maintenance at $38 an hour. No ownership, no management role, just maintenance." That was the moment the old version of me, the one who yelled, accused, and reached for the phone, almost took over again. Blake had not only chased my wife and used her money, he had built me into his plan as the help. He thought I would repair the building he was trying to buy with my wife's hidden cash, and he thought I would never know. I drove away from the daycare because Leah had already removed me from the pickup list. I was Ava's father, but one phone call and a few tears had turned me into somebody who had to prove he belonged near his own child. At Karen's office, she read the file in silence. When she reached the spousal acknowledgement, she looked over her glasses at me. "Did you authorize this?" "No." "Did Leah have access to that old email?" "She knew it existed. I don't know if she had the password." Karen printed the page, placed it in a separate folder and said, "Then you need to stop thinking like a husband for the next few days. Think like someone whose name has been used in a financial transaction without consent." I looked at the folder. "I don't want Ava dragged through this." Karen nodded once. Then don't make emotional threats, don't send angry texts, don't go to Claire's apartment, don't confront Blake. Let the documents do what your anger cannot. That sentence stayed with me. Let the documents do what your anger cannot. So I did. For 3 days I said nothing. Leah did not call. Mason texted that everyone knew what kind of man I was. Debbie left a voicemail saying Leah was terrified. Ron texted that if I cared about Ava, I would not make custody ugly. On the 4th day, Grace knocked on my door around 8 at night. She stood on the porch in a thick sweater, arms folded against the cold. Grace had watched Ava since she was a baby, and she was not the kind of woman who enjoyed drama. She said, "I need to tell you something before it gets worse." I stepped aside and let her in. She sat at my kitchen table and said Leah had asked her 2 weeks before Christmas if she would be willing to say I had a temper around Ava. Not that I hit anyone, just that I yelled, paced, got intense. I felt my hands go numb. Grace said, "I told her I wouldn't lie." I asked, "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I thought it was a marriage fight, and I didn't want to get between you two." Then she came over that night crying, and when she said you touched her, I knew something wasn't right. There are betrayals you can explain to yourself as panic. There are others that require planning. This had planning. Grace slid her phone across the table. Leah had texted her that morning. The message said, "If Ethan asks you anything, please remember how scared Ava looked. I need people to understand he's unstable." Unstable. That was the word she had chosen for the man whose name was being used behind his back. I took a picture of Grace's screen with her permission and sent it to Karen. Then I thanked Grace. The next morning, Karen filed an emergency motion to restore my access to Ava's daycare and prevent either parent from changing custody arrangements without written agreement. She did not accuse Leah of being a monster. She did not use the word affair. She stayed with facts. By lunch, Leah called me for the first time in 6 days. I let it ring. She called again, then she texted, "You hired a lawyer? Really?" I answered with one sentence, "Karen will handle legal issues." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then Leah wrote, "Blake was right about you." That was the last personal message I answered. The public reveal happened because Blake got greedy. If he had withdrawn the loan application, apologized privately and disappeared, maybe the whole thing would have ended in court filings and quiet damage. But Blake did not think he was in danger. He thought I was the angry husband on the outside of the room. He had a presentation scheduled at Millfield City Hall for the feed mill redevelopment. It was public enough to attract the local paper, the mayor, and a few business owners. Blake wanted the town to believe the project was already secured. He also wanted Leah there. I knew because Karen received a copy of the revised investor packet through our company portal. Leah's name had been removed from the public version. Mine was still buried in the maintenance budget, and on page 12, under local contractor support, Blake had written, "Ethan Cole, independent maintenance worker, projected labor savings of $62,000 during phase 1. He was still using me." Karen asked if I wanted the meeting cancelled. I said no. I did not want a parking lot fight or another scene outside Claire's apartment, but if Blake wanted an audience, I was done protecting him from one. The meeting was on a Thursday evening. I wore a navy suit Leah had never seen because I usually saved it for closings in Columbus, the kind of rooms where people stopped joking when numbers got real. Victor came with me. Karen came too. We stood in the back while Blake worked the room. He looked exactly like a man who had practiced success in the mirror. Camel coat, open collar, expensive watch. Leah stood near the front with Debbie and Ron. Mason was beside them, whispering something that made him smirk. Then Mason saw me. His smile widened first because he thought I had come to embarrass myself. He leaned toward Leah and said something. Leah turned. Her face changed when she saw the suit. Not enough to understand. Just enough to worry. Blake began his presentation with a photo of the old feed mill on the screen. He talked about revitalization, jobs, community pride, all the words men like him use when they want public emotion to cover private risk. He said Phase 1 required $420,000 in bridge capital and that local partners had stepped up. Then he clicked to the budget slide. My name appeared near the bottom. Ethan Cole, maintenance labor. A few people glanced back at me. Mason actually laughed under his breath. Blake smiled at the room and said, "This project is about everyone doing their part. Some people contribute capital, some contribute labor. That's how a town gets rebuilt." I stepped forward before Karen could stop me. Not fast, not angry, just forward. Blake saw me moving and his mouth tightened. "Ethan, this isn't really the place." I said, "I agree." The room went quiet. I kept walking until I stood near the center aisle. Leah whispered my name, but I did not look at her. I looked at the slide with my name on it. I said, "You listed me as maintenance labor without asking me." Blake gave a small laugh. It was a projection, nothing binding. Karen's voice came from behind me, calm and clear. "The issue is not only the labor line." Blake looked at her. For the first time all night, his confidence slipped. Victor handed a folder to the city administrator. Karen handed another to the mayor. Then she introduced herself as counsel for Northline Property Group and Harper Ridge Holdings. Blake frowned. "What does that have to do with this?" Karen looked at me. That was my turn. I said, "Northline reviewed your bridge loan application. Harper Ridge owns the feed mill note and the adjacent 2 parcels you need for Phase 2. For a second, nobody understood. Then the mayor looked at the folder. The city administrator flipped a page. Mason's smirk disappeared. Blake said, "That's not possible." I looked at him for the first time. "It is." His jaw moved, but no words came out. I said, "I'm the managing member of Harper Ridge Holdings. I own 64% of Northline's private lending arm. The building you've been bragging about all week sits on a note my company bought for $286,000 last August." The room went so still, I could hear the projector fan. Leah covered her mouth. Mason whispered, "What?" I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I said, "You called me maintenance. You told people I would save you $62,000 in labor. You asked my wife to pledge $75,000 toward your closing, and your file includes a spousal acknowledgement under my name that I never authorized." Blake's face flushed red up to his ears. "That is not what happened." Karen opened her folder. "The digital acknowledgement came from an inactive email address associated with Mr. Cole. We have server records showing he did not send it. We also have the application packet showing Mrs. Cole listed as a guarantor and silent investor with a reserve account of $118,734. Debbie gasped. Ron turned to Leah. "What is she talking about?" Leah looked like she might faint. Blake pointed at me. "This is personal. He's doing this because his wife came to me for help." I almost answered. Karen touched my arm lightly, and that was enough. Blake kept going because panic makes arrogant men talk too much. He said, "Everybody knows he's controlling." Leah was scared of him. She needed options. Karen said, "Then we can add defamation to the discussion later. For tonight, the material issue is that Mr. Walker submitted a financing package containing unauthorized use of Mr. Cole's identity and a guarantor whose marital status was misrepresented." The city administrator closed the folder slowly. The mayor looked at Blake. "Is the financing secured or not?" Blake opened his mouth. Nothing came out. That was the first visible crack. Then Victor spoke. "Northline is declining the application. Harper Ridge is also exercising its right to reject assignment under the purchase structure. The earnest deposit of $35,000 is subject to forfeiture under the seller's default clause pending review." A man near the front whispered, "Oh my God." Mason stepped back from Blake like bad luck was contagious. Leah finally spoke. Her voice shook. "Blake, you said Ethan had nothing to do with the property." Blake turned on her so fast I saw the truth before he said anything. "Because you told me he was nobody." The room heard it. Everybody heard it. Leah's face collapsed. I could have destroyed her right there. I could have said every cruel thing her brother had said to me, only sharper because mine would have been true. I could have told the whole room that she hid messages, signed documents, and let people call me unstable. But Ava's face came into my mind, so I did not finish Leah in public. I looked at Blake and said, You have 24 hours to preserve every communication related to my name, my wife's account, the loan package, and the feed mill deal. After that, my attorney will handle it. He stepped closer. You think money makes you a man now? I almost smiled. No, but it does make it harder for you to keep calling me broke. That was when the mayor ended the meeting. People lingered in that hungry, stunned way they do after a public fall. Phones came out. Debbie was crying. Ron looked smaller than I had ever seen him. Mason would not look at me. Leah followed me into the hallway. Ethan, please. I stopped near the drinking fountain. Karen stayed a few feet away, close enough to hear if she needed to. Leah's eyes were red. I didn't know he used your name. I said, but you knew about the account. She swallowed. I said, you knew about the $75,000. Her mouth trembled. He said it was temporary. He said once the deal closed, he would pay it back with interest. How much interest? She looked down. How much, Leah? 20%. I nodded slowly. So $15,000 was the price of making me look crazy. She flinched. It wasn't like that. It became like that when you tried to build a custody story before I even knew what was happening. Her face changed, and that told me Grace had been right. Leah whispered, I was scared. Of me or of getting caught? She did not answer. That silence answered enough. I walked out before my anger learned new words. The legal fallout took weeks. Public humiliation feels like an ending, but paperwork is where consequences become real. Blake's $35,000 earnest deposit was frozen first, then forfeited after he missed the cure deadline. Northline declined the bridge loan and circulated a fraud alert through 2 private lending networks. Within 10 days, another lender pulled a separate $310,000 commitment he had been counting on for a strip center renovation outside Dayton. His development company, which looked impressive online, turned out to be 3 late payments, 2 tax liens totaling $8,600, and a rented office he had staged for photos. Mason had been promised an $18,500 consulting fee for community outreach. When the project collapsed, he got nothing except his name mentioned in a local article about questionable redevelopment financing. Ron called me after that article came out. He sounded older. Ethan, I owe you an apology. I waited. He said, I didn't know. I believed that. I also knew not knowing had been convenient for him. I said, you knew enough to let your son humiliate me at Christmas. He breathed into the phone. You're right. That was all I wanted from him, and somehow it was too late to matter. Leah's part was harder. Karen traced the $118,534 account. Most of it was Leah's private savings and bonuses from work, money I had not known about and had no right to control. But $42,600 had come from transfers out of our household account over 16 months, always in amounts small enough that I missed them because I trusted her with bills. Another $9,800 came from a tax refund I thought had gone toward Ava's preschool deposit. That number hurt more than the affair question, not because of the money, because it had been quiet theft from the life we were supposedly building. Leah admitted through her attorney that Blake had contacted her before Christmas, saying he still loved her and that I would never give her the life she deserved. He told her the feed mill deal would make him $900,000 within 2 years if she helped him close it. He did not tell her I controlled the note. He did not tell her he owed back taxes, and she did not tell him no. That was the part I could not get past. She met me once in Karen's conference room in late February, not alone. Her attorney sat beside her. Karen sat beside me. There was coffee nobody drank and a box of tissues Leah kept touching but not using. Leah looked thinner, not innocent, just tired. She said, I need you to know I didn't sleep with him. I looked at the table. Maybe that was true, maybe it was not. By then, it was not the question that mattered most. I said, you let him into our marriage, then you helped him use my name. She started crying. I was angry at you. You were always so guarded about money, about work, about everything. My family made me feel like I had settled, and Blake made me feel like I could still be someone. You were my wife. I know. You were Ava's mother. Her face twisted then, because that one landed where it should have. I said, I was not perfect. I should not have grabbed for your phone. I should not have yelled in front of Ava. I'll carry that. But you don't get to turn my mistake into permission for what you did. She wiped her face. What happens now? I looked at Karen before answering, not because I needed permission, but because I needed restraint. You repay the $52,400 that came from household and tax money. Your attorney already has the schedule. I am not pursuing criminal charges against you if the repayment agreement is signed and custody stays clean. Blake is not getting that protection. Leah looked up fast. I said, I won't make Ava visit her mother in court if I can avoid it. That is the line I'm not crossing. For the first time in months, Leah looked at me like she saw me clearly. Not rich, not poor, not unstable, just clear. She whispered, Are you divorcing me? I said, Yes. The word did not feel powerful. It felt like cutting off a hand to stop an infection. I kept the house because stability mattered for Ava. Leah moved into a 2-bedroom apartment 12 minutes away, $1,750 a month, near Ava's preschool. We agreed on shared custody after the temporary order. 4 nights with me, 3 with Leah, then alternating weekends once Ava adjusted. The first night Ava came home, she walked into her room and asked if Mommy was still mad. I sat on the floor beside her bed and told her the only true thing a child can safely hold. No, baby. The grown-ups are fixing grown-up problems. You are loved in both houses. She accepted that because she was 4 and still believed adults fixed what they broke. Blake threatened a lawsuit after the City Hall meeting. Karen responded with 11 pages of documents, including the unauthorized acknowledgement, the investor packet, the false labor listing, the tax liens, and screenshots Leah provided after her own attorney advised her to stop protecting him. He vanished from Millfield before spring. The last I heard, his truck had been repossessed behind a hotel outside Dayton, and the state was reviewing a complaint tied to another investor who had wired him $22,000 for a project that never existed. I did not celebrate when I heard that. I just slept better. Mason sent one apology text in March. It said, I was wrong about you. I deleted it. Not because I needed to punish him forever, because some apologies are only sent after the audience changes. By April, the feed mill came back to us clean. Harper Ridge took full control after the previous owner settled the note for $312,000. I could have flipped it. A buyer offered $610,000 cash once the title issues cleared. Instead, I held it. A year later, that building reopened as a small commercial hub with a bakery, 2 offices, and a childcare center on the ground floor. The childcare lease was $4,200 a month below market, because I knew what working parents needed. The ribbon cutting was quiet. No dramatic speech, no revenge tour. Ron came with Debbie. Leah came too, holding Ava's hand. Mason did not. When Ava saw me, she ran across the sidewalk and slammed into my legs. She was 5 by then, taller, louder, missing one front tooth. Leah walked over slowly. She looked up at the restored brick and the new sign above the entrance. You really did it, she said. I nodded. Yeah. Ava tugged my sleeve and asked if this was Daddy's building. I looked at Leah before I answered. There were 100 little knives I could have used with a smile. Instead, I crouched beside my daughter and said, It's a building Daddy helped fix. Leah's eyes filled, but she did not cry. That was the difference between revenge and dignity. Revenge would have made sure Ava knew every detail. Dignity let her keep a childhood. Later, after the photos were taken and the bakery owner handed Ava a cookie bigger than her hand, Leah stopped beside me near the front door. She said, I'm sorry I called you small. I watched Ava laughing with Debbie near the window. I said, I know. Leah waited, maybe for forgiveness, maybe for punishment. I gave her neither. I said, Small was what you needed me to be so you could justify what you were doing. She closed her eyes. I looked at the street. At the building Blake had tried to use me to repair. At the family who once laughed while my name sat at the bottom of a budget like a tool they could rent. I thought about that Christmas doorway, Mason's charity husband joke, Blake's soft handshake, Leah turning her phone face down, Ava reaching for me over her mother's shoulder. For a long time, I thought the worst thing someone could do was underestimate you. I was wrong. The worst thing is when someone you love needs you to be less than you are so they do not have to feel guilty for betraying you. I do not hide who I am anymore. Not because I need people to clap. I still drive a truck. I still wear work boots. I still know how to fix a furnace and patch drywall better than most men in suits. But now, when someone looks at the boots and thinks they know the man, I let them talk. People always reveal themselves when they believe you have nothing. And by the time they find out what you carry, it is usually too late for them to take back what they said. What would you do in this situation? Be honest, or did this remind you of someone? Tell me in the comments. And if this made you think about your own relationship, I left something in the description that can help you build something stronger. Subscribe if you want more stories like this every day, and share this with someone who needs to hear this story.